Top 10 Worst Tractors Ever Created in History. Across nearly a century of agricultural innovation, some tractors transformed farming forever, but others almost destroyed it. Behind every success story lies a darker chapter, filled with machines that promised power yet delivered chaos. These were the tractors born from boardroom ambition and wartime urgency, engineered to redefine the fields, but remembered instead for catastrophic failures, constant breakdowns, and safety hazards that drove farmers to the edge. Some were rushed into production without proper testing, others suffered from flawed engineering, and a few weren't built to handle the realities of farm life. Yet each left deep scars on wallets, on workers, and on the history of modern agriculture. This is the untold story of 10 of the worst tractors ever created in history, and the costly lessons they left behind. Don't forget to press and hold that like button, leave a comment, and hit subscribe before we begin. Ranked 10th, Case 930, Comfort King. A bold vision that collided with reality. Not every engineering failure starts with a bad idea. In 1960, the J.I. Case Company released the 930 Comfort King, a tractor designed to reshape American farming during a decade of rapid mechanization. Agriculture was changing fast. Fields were expanding, planting schedules were tightening, and horsepower became the new measure of progress. Case positioned the 930 as a bold leap forward, a tractor built to give operators a commanding view of their land, superior comfort, and modern styling that set it apart from its competitors. The brochures promised innovation, an elevated seating platform, panoramic visibility, and a new approach to operator ergonomics. For farmers facing longer days and heavier workloads, it sounded like the future. On paper, the specifications supported the vision. A 6-cylinder diesel engine produced up to 80 horsepower, paired with an 8-speed manual transmission and a long wheelbase designed to enhance stability during heavy tillage. But when the 930 reached the fields, reality diverged sharply from expectation. The transmission lacked synchronizers, forcing operators to double-clutch perfectly to avoid grinding gears, a process that quickly became exhausting during repetitive row crop work. Farmers complained that after a full day, their legs felt numb from constant clutching. The open center hydraulic system reacted too slowly to lifting implements, creating delays that disrupted precision planting schedules. Under sustained loads, particularly in warmer southern states, the cooling system struggled and mechanics reported cylinder liner cracks caused by overheating. And while Case marketed the 930 as versatile, its nearly 7,000-pound weight and wide stance gave it a turning radius exceeding 17 feet. Okay for large, flat fields, but limiting for smaller, diversified farms where maneuverability was critical. As farmers began working these machines, feedback spread quickly across the Midwest. Some praised its torque and pulling power on straight, open land, but more criticized its limitations. On modern forums like Yesterday's Tractors, one operator recalls, "It could pull hard all day, but if you needed agility, forget it." Another farmer from Nebraska remembers planning every stop carefully because the braking system faded under heavy loads. You had to think 3 moves ahead, especially with a loaded trailer. These weren't isolated complaints. Dealers began reporting higher trade-in rates for competing models, especially John Deere's newly launched 4010 and later the 4020th. Deere's tractors offered synchronized transmissions, stronger hydraulics, and better multi-role adaptability, leaving the 930th struggling to define its place in the market. Case wanted the 930 to bridge 2 worlds, powerful enough for deep tillage yet compact enough for precision planting, but instead it failed to dominate either. By the mid-1960s, sales flattened, and the Comfort King branding became an unintentional irony among frustrated operators. Even today, restoration enthusiasts remain divided. Some admire the elevated operator platform and its torque-heavy engine, but many view it as a machine caught between eras, designed for a farming landscape that didn't quite exist. By 1969, Case quietly retired the 930, replacing it with the redesigned 1070 series, which introduced synchronized transmissions, stronger hydraulics, and improved cooling systems to address the 930's shortcomings. The lesson was clear. Ergonomic design and marketing vision cannot compensate for technical gaps that affect real-world performance. Yet the 930's legacy remains essential. It became a symbol of a transitional period in American agriculture, a moment when manufacturers learned that bigger wasn't always better, and when Case realized that comfort and visibility alone could not sell a tractor. The Case 930. Comfort King didn't destroy the company's reputation, but it reshaped its engineering philosophy and forced competitors to rethink operator needs versus field realities. It remains remembered less for what it achieved and more for how it changed the industry around it. A cautionary tale written in diesel, steel, and unmet expectations. Ranked 9th, John Deere 2010. The tractor that Deere wants you to forget. In 1960, John Deere launched its bold New Generation series, a lineup meant to replace decades of two-cylinder designs and redefine modern farming. At its center was the 2010, a compact utility tractor designed to do everything. Plow, cultivate, haul, and seed. Deere promised that one machine could manage the growing complexity of diversified farms. For a company known for its engineering precision, confidence was high. But behind closed doors, development timelines were tight, testing was limited, and pressure to launch quickly was enormous. The 2010 debuted with 3 engine options: gas, diesel, and LP gas, all 4 cylinders producing between 36 and 46 horsepower. Deere paired it with an early hydraulic control innovation called Select-Trol, which promised unprecedented precision in lifting and positioning implements. On paper, it seemed brilliant, but the first year in the field exposed everything Deere hadn't accounted for. Hydraulic seals failed prematurely. Valves stuck under temperature swings. Fluid leaks became so common that some owners joked the 2010 came pre-programmed to lubricate the ground. Repair costs were high, and worse, access to core components was restricted. To replace a faulty control valve, many mechanics had to remove half the upper chassis, creating downtime farmers couldn't afford during planting seasons. Even when functioning, performance disappointed. Operators complained that in heavy clay or wet soil, the 46 horsepower diesel struggled under modest load. Prolonged plowing led to overheating, and repeated stop-and-go work caused gear synchronizers to wear prematurely. For many, the frustration wasn't just mechanical, it was emotional. This was John Deere, a brand synonymous with reliability. By 1963, reputation damage was visible. Farmers quietly traded in the 2010s for Deere's larger 2510s and 3010s, which proved far more robust. Dealers themselves admitted off-record that the 2010 should have waited 2 more years in development. Today, the story hasn't softened. On yesterday's tractors, one Iowa farmer recalls, "The 2010 was my first Deere and my last for a decade." Yet 2010 isn't remembered as a catastrophe. Instead, it became Deere's wake-up call. The company doubled its testing protocols, revamped hydraulic designs, and shifted engine development strategies. While the 3010 and 4010 became icons, the 2010 stands quietly in Deere's history as the lesson they couldn't afford to repeat. Ranked 8th, Allis-Chalmers D21. America's first 100-plus horsepower tractor that went too far. The story of the D21 doesn't begin with quiet marketing campaigns or cautious engineering plans. It starts with a shockwave that rippled through American farming in 1963. At a time when most tractors were locked under 100 horsepower, Allis-Chalmers unveiled something the industry had never seen before. A machine so big, so bright, and so unapologetically ambitious that even rivals couldn't ignore it. Painted in unmistakable orange and towering above anything else on display, the D21 was built to send a message. The horsepower race had a new leader. Deere's 4010 delivered 84 horsepower. IH's Farmall 806 pushed 94. But Allis-Chalmers didn't just cross the 100 horsepower line. It smashed it, promising 103 horsepower straight from the factory, the most ever offered on a US-built row crop tractor. The gamble worked. At first, farmers crowded around dealership lots, stunned by its size and sleek styling. Trade shows hailed it as the future of mechanized agriculture. But that future arrived sooner than Allis-Chalmers was ready for, because building the most powerful tractor in America meant venturing into uncharted engineering territory, and the technology wasn't mature enough to handle what came next. Early models overheated under heavy tillage, especially during summer work. The 7.0-liter six-cylinder diesel delivered raw strength but strained the cooling system past its limits. Operators pulling 7-bottom plows watched coolant boil over mid-shift. In 1965, Allis doubled down by adding a factory turbocharger, boosting output to 128 horsepower. But the drivetrain wasn't built for that torque. Turbo seals failed, oil leaked onto hot manifolds, and the reliability farmers expected wasn't there. Fuel consumption was another problem. At nearly 8 gallons per hour under load, the D21 developed a reputation as one of the thirstiest tractors of its time. Farmers admired its brute strength, but quickly calculated its operational costs. And for many mid-sized farms, the math didn't add up. Even when everything worked, handling remained a challenge. At over 10,000 pounds, the D21 demanded ideal conditions: vast open fields with dry, stable soil. On wet ground, the tractor's weight and poor balance meant it often sank before its horsepower could matter. For smaller farms or hilly terrain, its size became a liability. On modern farms, operators still remember it vividly. One Kansas farmer writes, "It was the most powerful thing we'd ever run until it stopped." Another adds, "Turbo seals blew 3 times in one season." After that, we switched to a Farmall 1206. By 1969, Allis-Chalmers quietly retired the D21 and moved to the redesigned 220 series, solving many of the failures that plagued its predecessor. But the D21's impact was lasting. It forced John Deere, IH and Case, to rethink not just how much horsepower farmers needed, but how quickly manufacturers should chase it. The D21 wasn't a disaster. It was something rarer, a bold, ambitious experiment that proved being first isn't the same as being ready. Its legacy lives in the lessons it taught, both to Allis-Chalmers and the entire American tractor industry. Ranked 7th, Massey Ferguson 1100. The tractor that broke more PTOs than records. By 1964, Massey Ferguson was under pressure. Deere's 4020 was rewriting the rules for row crop tractors. International Harvester's 806 was pulling bigger implements than ever. And Case had just launched the towering 930 Comfort King. To stay competitive, Massey introduced the 1100, a sleek, powerful-looking machine marketed as both reliable and easy to maintain. Dealers were promised fewer warranty claims. Farmers were promised simplicity and strength. Reality was different. Under the hood, the 1100 offered a 5.8-liter Perkins diesel rated at around 95 PTO horsepower. Respectable on paper. But when owners hit the fields, mechanical failures mounted quickly. The most infamous issue was the PTO shaft. Under moderate loads, shafts sheared without warning. Farmers running silage choppers or balers found themselves replacing PTO units, not annually, but multiple times per season. Then came the multi-power transmission, Massey's optional shift-on-the-go system designed to give farmers 12 usable speeds. In practice, the clutch packs inside wore down fast, causing power loss and constant gear slipping under load. Worse, diagnosing the problem wasn't straightforward, and repair costs were staggering. On one Iowa forum, a mechanic wrote, "Multi-power sounded genius until you tore one apart. Replacing those clutches was like surgery." The hydraulics added another layer of frustration. Massey equipped the 1100 with a closed-center hydraulic system, advanced for the time, but notoriously delicate. Leaking seals, cavitating pumps, and finicky control valves created endless headaches. Farmers discovered that local mechanics often lacked the tools or training to troubleshoot the system. Dealers began reporting that warranty claims for hydraulics alone were eating into their profit margins. Even fuel efficiency, one of the selling points, became a source of complaint. Farmers joked that the 1100 burned diesel like a Deere 4020, but pulled like a smaller machine. And while the Perkins engine itself was fundamentally strong, the surrounding components let the entire platform down. By 1968, frustration reached service bays across North America. On yesterday's tractors, a Minnesota farmer recalls, "We bought two 1070s in 1967. Both went through PTO shafts before the first season ended." Another dealer remembers stacking broken multi-power units behind the shop like cordwood. By the time Massey discontinued the 1100 in 1972, damage to the brand's reputation was done. Deere and IH surged ahead, and dealers who had once championed Massey struggled to rebuild trust among their customers. Later models like the 1130 and 1150 would correct many of these failures. But for Massey Ferguson, the 1100 remains a reminder of what happens when marketing promises exceed engineering reality. Ranked 6th, Ford 6000 Commander, the tractor behind America's biggest recall. When Ford introduced the 6000 Commander in 1961, the company's ambitions were clear. This wasn't just another mid-sized tractor. Ford declared that it belonged at the top of America's farming industry. For decades, John Deere and International Harvester had dominated the row crop market. Still, Ford believed it could change the game by doing what nobody else dared, putting a fully automatic power shift transmission into a mainstream farm tractor. The Select O-Speed transmission was the centerpiece. 10 forward gears, seamless shifting, and reduced operator fatigue. On paper, it sounded revolutionary. Farmers could keep the engine at peak power without stopping, switching from plowing to planting without touching the clutch. Ford positioned the 6000 Commander as the tractor of the future, but in rushing to be first, Ford skipped a critical step: long-term reliability testing. Within months of release, reports flooded in from across the Midwest. Select O-Speed units failed unpredictably, sometimes slipping under load, sometimes locking entirely, and occasionally dropping into neutral midfield. One Illinois operator recalled plowing 40 acres when his 6000 suddenly froze solid, like the gearbox welded itself shut. The problems didn't stop at the transmission. The 4.0-liter diesel engine suffered chronic head gasket leaks, cylinder scoring, and overheating under extended heavy pulling. Hydraulic response was slow compared to Deere's 3010, making the tractor less efficient in row crop work. But the breaking point came when warranty claims skyrocketed beyond what Ford's dealer network could handle. In 1963, just 2 years after launch, Ford issued one of the largest tractor recalls in U.S. history, pulling nearly every 6000 Commanders off the market. The entire powertrain was re-engineered, and transmission replacements were done under warranty at massive cost. Dealers became overwhelmed, and many were forced to hire additional mechanics to manage the failures. Some farmers waited months for repaired machines, while others parked their 6000s permanently and switched to Deere or IH. On yesterday's tractors, one Iowa farmer writes, "By the time ours came back from the shop, planting season was over. That was the last Ford we bought." In 1965, Ford released the redesigned 6000 Commander Series 2, resolving many of the flaws. But the damage was irreversible. Farmers remembered the breakdowns, the downtime, and the sense of betrayal from a brand they thought they could trust. The 6000 Commander wasn't just a product failure. It became a cautionary tale across the entire industry. It taught manufacturers that innovation without rigorous field testing can erase decades of brand loyalty overnight. Ford recovered in later decades, but in farm country, the memory of the 6000 Commander still lingers like a warning. Ranked 5th, Zetor 8011. Crystal, Eastern Europe's big bet that fell short. By the late 1960s, farming behind the Iron Curtain operated under different rules. Czechoslovakia's engineers at Zetor weren't competing for luxury markets or premium innovation. They were working within strict budgets, limited materials, and Cold War production quotas. Yet when the 8011 Crystal debuted in 1968, it promised something farmers in the Eastern Bloc had rarely seen before: a modern tractor with an enclosed cab, sharper styling, and enough power to handle larger collective farm operations. Unlike American manufacturers chasing high horsepower and advanced hydraulics, Zetor had a different goal: to deliver more capability at lower cost. With an 82 horsepower diesel engine, a 10-speed gearbox, and dual hydraulic circuits, the Crystal looked, on paper, like a serious step forward. But political pressures meant the machine went into production before durability testing was finished. The result was a tractor designed for ambition, but built under constraint. Operators soon discovered the electrical system was fragile. Its dual 12-volt layout caused shorts, corroded connectors, and sudden starter failures, especially in damp climates. Mechanics on collective farms improvised quick fixes. In Western export markets, warranty claims soared. Hydraulics, too, became a point of frustration. Without proper filtration, pumps wore prematurely and valves stuck unpredictably, sometimes causing implements to drop mid-operation. A dangerous problem during precision planting. The unsynchronized 10-speed transmission added another layer of difficulty. Skilled operators could master double clutching, but constant heavy towing wore gears rapidly. Overheating also plagued the naturally aspirated four-cylinder diesel, especially when pulling modern multi-row implements designed for Western tractors. Inside the Eastern Bloc, compromises were expected, and the 8011 earned cautious acceptance on collective farms where cost and fuel economy mattered more than convenience. But Zetor wanted to sell the Crystal beyond socialist markets. In West Germany and the UK, where farmers compared it to Deere's 4020 or Massey's 1100, the flaws became impossible to overlook. Dealers struggled with parts shortages, mechanics lacked proper training, and owners reported downtime far above industry norms. On a UK vintage tractor forum, one restorer recalls, "The Crystal looked futuristic, but keeping it working was a full-time job." By 1975, Zetor scaled back its Western export ambitions, focusing on serving Soviet and Eastern European collective farms instead. Yet the 8011 Crystal wasn't a complete failure. It introduced features like the enclosed cab and angular styling that influenced tractor design for decades. What it couldn't do was prove that socialist engineering could match the manufacturing tolerances, testing budgets, and aftermarket support available in the West. For Zetor, the Crystal became less a flagship and more a mirror, reflecting how political priorities and limited resources shaped what their machines could and couldn't achieve. Ranked fourth, Farmall 560, the tractor that almost broke International Harvester. In 1958, International Harvester launched the Farmall 560, believing it had built the machine that would cement its dominance in American agriculture. At the time, IH controlled nearly half of the U.S. tractor market, and the 560 was marketed as the start of a new era. A tractor combining higher power with proven reliability. But hidden beneath its bold promises was a gamble that would haunt the company for years. The 560's engineers chose to reuse the rear axle and transmission design from the Farmall M, first introduced in 1939. On paper, this decision saved development time and costs. In practice, it created a system designed for 50 horsepower that was now expected to handle 66 PTO horsepower and far more torque. Within months, farmers began experiencing catastrophic failures. Gears shattered midfield, differential housings cracked under heavy tillage, and bearings disintegrated during long planting days. Dealers were swamped. Service bays filled with 560's waiting for replacement assemblies, while farmers lost critical planting windows. Frustration mounted quickly. On yesterday's tractors, one Illinois operator recalls, "We broke 2 560 rear ends in the same season. Deere got our next purchase." By 1959, IH had no choice but to issue one of the largest recalls in U.S. tractor history. Nearly every Farmall 560 on the market received a redesigned rear end. A massive logistical operation costing IH an estimated $50 million. At the time, it was a financial shockwave that reverberated through the entire agricultural industry. But the recall did more than drain IH's resources. It shattered farmer confidence. For decades, IH had built its reputation on durability and dependability. Yet the 560 exposed a company cutting corners to protect market share. Farmers who once swore by Farmalls began shifting to John Deere's upcoming 4010, a model built on entirely new engineering foundations. The 560 wasn't just a troubled tractor, it became a turning point. IH would spend much of the 1960s rebuilding its credibility, launching stronger successors like the 706 and 806. But the damage was done. For Deere, the 560 failure opened doors that had been closed for decades, helping it rise from a regional competitor to a national leader in row crop tractors. Today, restored 600s appear at tractor shows as reminders of an era when engineering shortcuts had consequences, measured not just in warranty claims, but in market share lost forever. Ranked third, Fiat 180-90 Turbo, the cult tractor that burned fuel and expectations. Ask farmers across Europe about the Fiat 18090 Turbo, and you'll hear two very different stories. For some, it was the ultimate workhorse, a tractor with brute pulling strength that outclassed everything else in its field. For others, it was a financial nightmare, burning fuel and breaking parts faster than any profit it could deliver. Released in 1984, the 18090 wasn't just another model in Fiatagri's lineup. It was a statement. Beneath its angular Italian styling sat a 13.8-liter turbocharged diesel producing 180 horsepower, one of the highest outputs available in Europe at the time. Farmers nicknamed it Il Locomotiva, the locomotive, because when conditions were right, the 18090 could drag implements other tractors wouldn't dare touch. But that power came at a price. At full load, the 1890 consumed up to 18 gallons, approximately 70 liters, of diesel per hour. An eye-watering figure during the fuel price spikes of the late 1980s. And when components failed, as they often did, the bills were just as brutal. Turbo seals burned out under sustained fieldwork, coating exhaust manifolds with oil. Synchronizers in the 16+8 gearbox wore prematurely, forcing costly clutch replacements. The cooling system struggled under Mediterranean heat, causing operators in Spain and southern Italy to work around midday breaks to keep engines alive. And for many, the real frustration came later. Fiat's dealer network wasn't ready to support a machine this complex, leading to long waits for replacement parts and extended downtime during planting seasons. Reactions split sharply by region. In southern Europe, particularly in Italy and Spain, the 1809 developed a cult following among cereal and olive farmers who needed raw horsepower above all else. On farming forums today, Italian owners still post nostalgically, "It pulled like a locomotive, unforgettable." But in northern Europe, where precision farming demanded efficiency and reliability, the 18090 struggled against rivals like Fendt, John Deere, and Case IH. German mechanics joke that Fiat made a sports car disguised as a tractor, beautiful to drive, expensive to maintain. By 1990, Fiat replaced the 18090 with the Winter Series, introducing better fuel economy and redesigned cooling systems. Yet decades later, the 1890 remains a collector's icon. Not because it was perfect, but because it was polarizing. For those who loved it, there was nothing like it. For those who hated it, they'd never buy another. This was a tractor built on extremes. Massive power, high drama, unforgettable design. A machine that left no one neutral. Ranked second, International Harvester 3588. The tractor that tried to rewrite the rules and failed. When the International Harvester 3588 rolled into dealerships in 1978, farmers didn't know what to make of it. With its boxy cab shoved forward, oversized front hood, and extended drive shaft housing, it looked nothing like any tractor on the market. Some operators laughed and called it Snoopy because the cab sat far ahead of the engine, like a cartoon dog's nose. Others wondered if IH had finally cracked the code on a new generation of all-wheel drive row crop tractors. On paper, the idea was bold. IH engineers wanted to create a tractor that combined the maneuverability of a smaller row crop machine with the pulling power of four-wheel drive. Instead of designing an articulated tractor like John Deere or Versatile, IH came up with a unique solution, a fixed-frame tractor with engine and transmission at the rear, and a long drive shaft running forward to power the front axle. This forward-mounted cab gave operators a better view of implements, and the unusual layout allowed a surprisingly tight turning radius. But real-world farming quickly exposed the flaws. The long drive shaft housing became a constant source of vibration, and its universal joints wore out alarmingly fast. The DT436 turbocharged diesel produced 145 horsepower, which was respectable, but the tractor's 17,000-pound weight meant that power often felt sluggish in heavy field work. Cooling issues plagued early models, especially in hotter climates, and operators reported frequent hydraulic leaks from poorly sealed lines running the length of the frame. And then came the real frustration: parts availability. By the late 1970s, International Harvester was in deep financial trouble, cutting costs and restructuring its dealer network. Farmers often waited weeks for replacement drive shaft components or hydraulic fittings, losing valuable planting time. Forums today are full of former owners recalling the same nightmare. When it ran like nothing else. But when it broke, it sat in the shed for months. Sales never took off. Between 1978 and 1981, only about 7,000 units were produced before the 2+2 series was discontinued. IH hoped the 3,588 would redefine the future of row crop power. Instead, it became a symbol of corporate desperation. For many farmers, it was an expensive lesson in what happens when engineering experiments meet real-world expectations. The 3,588 didn't fail because IH lacked vision. It failed because it asked farmers to adopt a radical new concept at a time when they needed stability. In the end, it became one of the most unforgettable missteps in tractor design history. In first place, Fordson Model N, the tractor that fed Britain but broke its farmers. The Fordson Model N carried the weight of Britain's agricultural hopes at one of its darkest moments. Released in 1932, during the Great Depression, this machine was designed to be the affordable answer to food security across the UK. On paper, it succeeded spectacularly. With over 300,000 units produced until 1945, the Model N became a symbol of modernization. But behind the headlines and patriotic posters lay a different reality, one that many farmers still remember bitterly. Unlike its competitors, the Model N relied on a lightweight frame paired with a 3.6-liter petrol-paraffin engine, producing just 27 horsepower. Its simplicity made it cheap to manufacture, but it came at a cost. Poor stability, frequent carburetor failures, and rear axle weaknesses that cracked under continuous plowing. Farmers who pushed the Model N beyond its modest limits often ended up with broken gearboxes and seized engines, issues exacerbated by wartime metal shortages that made quality steel hard to source. The Second World War magnified both its strengths and its flaws. When German blockades threatened Britain's food supply, the government distributed thousands of Model Ns under the Dig for Victory campaign, turning them into frontline tools of survival. Yet operators quickly discovered that in heavy soils or on sloped terrain, the Model N's high center of gravity made it prone to tipping accidents, leading to a surge of farm injuries between 1941 and 1943. Reports from the Ministry of Agriculture archives note that several counties filed safety complaints, but production continued uninterrupted due to urgent demand. Despite its reputation for danger and breakdowns, the Model N left an undeniable mark on British agriculture. Its affordability enabled small farmers to mechanize for the first time, transforming output across regions where horse-drawn plows had ruled for centuries. But for many who worked behind its wheel, it also symbolized financial strain and constant repairs. A machine that promised salvation, but too often delivered hardship. The paradox of the Fordson Model N is why it earns the top spot on this list. A tractor remembered as both a savior and a liability, embodying Britain's desperate gamble on mass mechanization during crisis years. History remembers innovation, but it also remembers failure. Every tractor on this list carried the hopes of farmers, engineers, and entire companies. Yet each one became a cautionary tale about what happens when ambition outpaces reality. Some bankrupted manufacturers, others cost farmers entire harvests, and a few nearly reshaped the way safety laws were written. But these failures also forced the industry to evolve, driving stricter testing, stronger engineering standards, and better protections for the people working the land. And while these machines are now relics of the past, their stories still echo in every modern tractor. They remind us that progress is never free. Every breakthrough comes with risks, and every failure leaves a lesson carved into the history of farming. Let us know which one resonates with you in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this.